thank you all for coming. We're going to go ahead and hop right into it. If you have any questions, please feel free to come find me. I'll be at the booth at Zetier, the company at the back of your badge. It's going to be in the first room right near the doors. About me, my name is Julian, or Mr. Beltz. I have some college degrees, some work experience, but you didn't come here for me. You came here for the presentation. So let's go ahead and hop right into that. So what are we going to be talking about? As leaders and engineers in our field, we often face buzzwords, new technologies, emerging technologies, and we have to make the decision to invest in them, to make that change, whether it's good to make that change or whether we wait maybe until it's too late. Now, buzzwords, enthusiasm, and hype, you can generally classify it as, in our industry, oftentimes technologies or methodologies that have a lot of enthusiasm behind them, usually by a particular group. Now, these often come with some kind of promise, right? You have X, and it promises Y. And that kind of leads into the previous slide, because that promise, what it does, is either a one-hit wonder, it's going to exceed, it's going to fulfill all your dreams, right? It's going to be as close to a free lunch as you can get, or it won't. It's going to be a failure, it's going to be a scam, it's going to be snake oil. And we as engineers walk a difficult tightrope, and leaders, making that decision in what is actually going to take off and what won't. Now, right off the bat, we're going to go ahead and take a look at some historical examples so that we can look at modern day examples through the perspective of these historical examples. The best way to look at modern day problems is through a historical lens, right? So, you can probably guess what these dates mean based on the very helpful icons. But 1876, Alexander Graham Bell makes the first phone call, a pivotal moment in cellular communications, the cell phone, wireless communications, so on and so on. 1903, the Wright brothers make their first powered flight in their Kitty Hawk glider, and I think we all understand the importance of that. We now have a whole branch of the military just for that, not the Kitty Hawk glider, but powered flight. 1957, the Soviet Union beat us to launching Earth's first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, obviously being a pivotal moment in the early space race, as well as leading to the entire branch of satellite communications, satellite technology, geospatial intelligence, so on and so on. A lot of these have wide-ranging benefits that, if I were to go over all these, we don't have time today. 1969, the first message is sent over ARPANET, the predecessor to the internet. And again, I think this is one of the most successful examples we can think of today. Now, other things that I don't mention here, the steam engine or powered vehicles, I don't mention cased rounds, penicillin, vaccines, or other technologies or innovations that changed the world. And oftentimes, when they were invented or when these key steps were made, they drove up this hype and this enthusiasm around them. They drove up this enthusiasm around them, and some of the world asked, is this real, right? You can look back on old news broadcasts about the internet. People saying, I can email my doctor now. He can get it within a minute. I don't need to go down to the store. I don't need to drive. I don't need to go anywhere. He can just do it like that. And people looking at that go, is that really worth it? Do I want to install $100 or more of hardware, get internet actually wired into my house, learn this new technology just so I can email my doctor? And I think it's easy from 2024 to look back on that and go, of course the internet has so much more benefits. The people there that were advocating for the internet, they only saw a tiny fraction of what it could do. But we often sit in the naysayer seat of modern day technologies, and we're forced to decide how revolutionary is this new technology that we face, or do I invest in it and lose all my money? Do I invest in it and it actually provides real operational damage because it didn't live up to its promise? Now, May 16th, 1937. If off the bat you thought of the Hindenburg crashing in Manchester Township, New Jersey, you're a history nerd, and you should feel bad. I'm joking. But obviously that's a key moment in the decline of hydrogen-powered airships, where the promise was cheap, easy air travel, right? You don't need to waste so much fuel. You don't have the fuel keeping you afloat by powering the wings. Your buoyancy keeps you afloat. But obviously the hype there did not outweigh the safety concerns and the real danger that it posed. Let's look at a more modern example. The F-35 program was estimated to cost about $200 billion, and 20 years later, it has more than doubled. Some deadlines have not been met. Some features have not been done. Is that a failure? I think with this example and the next one I'm about to cover, it's harder to look at a historical example and say that was a failure, because if you look at the F-35 program, we have them today. They are incredible pieces of engineering. They do contribute significantly to global defense. The United States defense and global safety at large. The Future Combat Systems program ate up $18.1 billion before it was ultimately canceled. Was that another failure? Maybe, maybe not. It ultimately made inroads, inspiring Congress and policymakers about the feasibility of these technologies and paving the way for paths, future programs, because ultimately the program wasn't canceled and abandoned. It was canceled and superseded by other programs that took its place. Would they have been able to exist without it? Maybe. Would it be different? Probably. It's hard to know. You really play a guess who kind of game when you're talking about these things. But these are some historical examples. And it's also important to note that not every world-changing innovation comes with fanfare. Armor has completely revolutionized the world, right? You often rate battleships by how tough their armor is, right? What kind of rounds they can withstand. The President's limousine has insane armor and weighs a lot more than any other car because it's a needed invention. It's a world-changing invention. You can look in the Old Testament and see how important armor has been throughout millennia of human history. But unless you're a real nerd, I don't think anyone gets super excited about new armor because it's just make it heavier, make it thicker, make it, if you're a material scientist, make it a little bit more X property. So sometimes technology comes along without the fanfare, and that's an easy decision. But that's not what we're going to be talking about today. Now, why do we want to avoid the hype? I came here with 3 points. We could probably go back and forth after this and talk about more points. But in general, it makes honest discourse a little bit harder. If I wanted to talk to you about the application of blockchain technology in healthcare, in finances, in the military, you can have an immutable transcript of the ownership of a Humvee, every repair done to it. It's inchangeable, right? You will always have access to it. But it's hard to have that conversation about blockchain without cryptocurrency coming into play. And even if you can, it's hard to separate your feelings, right? Oh, cryptocurrency, that's a scam, that's a fad, right? It's just a bunch of people going crazy about nothing. If that's how you feel about it, it's going to bleed over into your connotation about blockchain if that's how you feel about the thing, right? Because that's the only thing you know about blockchain. Now, on the other hand, if you think cryptocurrency is the greatest thing since sliced bread, that's going to play in the other way. And it's hard, leading into the second part, it polarizes people, so it's hard to find somebody that sits in this middle, that's knowledgeable about it, that can tell you the honest pros and cons. And I can tell you as an engineer, that's a problem that I do face. And I'll talk about some strategies to mitigate that at the end. But if you talk to somebody who hates cryptocurrency, they're often going to say, oh no, you want to go with the more expensive contractor option. They're going to build out this great accounting feature. The other one says, yeah, it's going to be cheap, it's going to be easy, it's going to revolutionize the world, it's exactly what you're looking for, bada bing, bada boom. And again, as leaders and engineers, this is a tough decision. We need to be familiar with the technology and the actual applications behind it without getting blinded by the enthusiasm that drives it. And then lastly, most obviously, just because it's hype, just because it's a buzzword, just because people are excited about it, does not mean it's good. There's a lot of enthusiasm around the Hindenburg and probably about the Titanic. There's a lot of enthusiasm about Theranos that ultimately ended up being a scam. Now, obviously, when you get into more malicious lies and scams, it turns the game a little bit. But even with technologies that people are genuinely enthusiastic about, right? Nuclear fusion is only 5 years away, you know. And it's been like that for decades. Now, are we making real progress? I don't doubt it. But just because it's popular, just because it's going to revolutionize the world doesn't necessarily mean that it will. Maybe the core idea doesn't hold water. Maybe the path that you're trying just doesn't work. Now, all doom and gloom, right? But is there an upside to it? Again, pairs of 3, not really pairs, but hype is usually for a reason, right? There is hype behind nuclear fusion because the promise is great, because you can have clean, free, unlimited energy for the entire future. Obviously, nuances exist. Planes were hyped. The internet was hyped, and we can see why from 2024. But from 2050, are we going to see why certain technologies that are hyped today were hyped? And I think also looking back, we'll be able to see which technologies didn't make it. But unfortunately, while hindsight is 20/20, today isn't. Now, the second part and the third part are interlinked. It drives innovation, work, and development. Because people like AI, because people are excited about it, they're going to start companies. They're going to start startups. They're going to do a PhD and a thesis. They're going to specialize in it. They're going to push it forward. And ultimately, that means that the benefit that AI gives you right now, it's only going to increase because people are going to keep working on it. The operational value that it will have on your unit, your company, whatever organization you're with, will only keep improving. And because people like working on popular technology. And we're going to cover this more at the end if I end up getting to it. But we definitely have a recruiting issue in the military. And even companies often have a recruiting issue finding skilled engineers. If you are working on outdated technology from the Soviet era, people aren't going to want to come work for you because, number one, they don't know it. And number two, they want to work on quantum computers, not some, I don't even know a good example. So the current technologies that we'll be looking at: AI, quantum computers, Rust, and drones. So right off the bat, we're going to be covering AI. So what is AI? In general, AI is the ability for a machine to be able to replicate some aspect of human intelligence or nature. Excuse me. And the promise there is, theoretically, if you're able to make a perfect model of the human brain, every neuron, every interaction, every electron, every chemical, why couldn't you just make it a simulation and have a human intelligence there? Now, you get a little bit philosophical. Is there a soul? Is there a spark there that isn't physical? You know, and that's, for the time being, definitely a more personal debate. But theoretically, if you could make a human mind inside of a computer, you can make it run at the speed of a computer. So a computer can do 3 billion things a second. A lot of them are add, subtract, move. But you can still do hundreds or thousands of thoughts a second. You can make it then access the entirety of Wikipedia. You can have an engineer that doesn't sleep, doesn't rest, hopefully doesn't make mistakes. And at the cost of a computer, what does that mean? It means that what we pay for 1 hour of someone's life is a lot more than what we pay for 1 hour of a computer's time. So if you have a budget to hire 100 engineers, why not go and hire 10,000 computer engineers that never sleep, that'll get the work done, that'll be better, faster, stronger, XYZ. Now, obviously, that's the promise, right? That's the hype. That's where the industry wants to go. Now, why aren't we there yet? I think it speaks to a lot of the engineering problems. I think hopefully everyone in this room is familiar with ChatGPT by OpenAI. Without having millions of dollars of hardware, an enormous amount of data, and years of research and experimentation and failure, they wouldn't be where they're at. And even now, it's not a human. It's not fully aware. It's not at that point yet. But I think 5 years ago, we would have been having to talk about, can AI get to where ChatGPT is currently? So I think it's going to be an exciting few years. Now, this is obviously the downside. You need to be able to, as a leader, if you want to incorporate AI, you often need to know every aspect of it so it doesn't make mistakes, which on the battlefield can cost lives. How do you know the data that you're feeding your AI wasn't given you by the Russians? So it's on the battlefield, and it sees an enemy plane, it goes, oh, no, that's friendly. Or when it sees your plane, it goes, oh, that's an enemy, and automatically fires rockets at it. How do you know that the data that you have is good, or the model that you have is powerful enough to discern the chaos on the battlefield? How do you know these things? And this is the real technical difficulty, because when you're dealing with AI, you often can't, right? I think it speaks volumes that we don't know anything about the human brain. We know a lot, but bear with me. Now, this is a very common machine learning model called called a neural network. In general, the circles represent usually an equation. You can think of y equals mx plus b. And the lines coming from it are it setting that output to another equation to be its input. And you often have very large models with many layers of this. And we can think about this and wonder, how can this recognize faces, generate a video? How can this decipher the chaos in the battlefield and give us an edge to win? And I think we actually have a great, not so artificial example in the room with us. Obviously, a lot of things in AI, i.e. neural networks, are often based upon what we know and can see in the real world, i.e. our brains and our neurons. And you are not a single neuron, right? You could probably, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I'd assume you can kill a single neuron and you'd be mostly fine. It's not the single neuron that makes up you. It's not even a small group of neurons. It's the connections in between them. And that's what we see in AI. It's the emerging complexity between these relationships that builds up this emergent behavior. It's going to be a deep dive into some more technicalities of how things work. But yeah, that's AI. There's the promise, what it could do, some of the technical challenges that we have, how it works, and now hopefully you as engineers and leaders are a little bit more versed on it. Next up is going to be quantum computers. Right off the bat, I gave you some numbers so you can kind of see the projected growth of quantum computers, but it is very much an expensive field to get started in. Now, what is the promise here? Quantum computers will churn through protein folding simulations and be able to cure cancer. They'll be able to crack encryption and expose state secrets, right? We'll be able to read everyone's encryption. Now, is that true? Not really. The protein folding, hopefully. But what is a quantum computer? A quantum computer is not a faster computer. It's not your computer, but 1,000 times faster. If it was, we just buy 1,000 more computers, right? We have the money to do that. We can do that. What it is ultimately a different computer. Like a submarine is different than a plane. While a regular computer operates on ones and zeros, you have a qubit that can either be 1 or 0, on or off, but it can also be in a superposition of states. And at that point, you get into really advanced probability that only mathematicians understand. But ultimately, your computer, your classical computer, only does math, right? When it connects to a website, when you're playing a video game, when you're doing anything, all it's really doing is just math, complicated equations. And all a quantum computer does is math. It's just that a quantum computer can do certain kinds of math a lot easier. Now, it just so happens that some of those problems are like protein folding. And some of those problems are encryption. Now, the key word there is some. For example, most of our modern day encryption standards are going to be affected by quantum computing. If you're a nerd like me and you know what this means, symmetric encryption algorithms take about a halving to their strength, which is still not too unacceptable. If it takes 4 billion years to crack it, it means it's only going to take 2 billion years. So as long as you're still secure, symmetric encryption isn't too widely affected. However, I would argue the more commonly used one, asymmetric encryption, takes a much larger hit, to the fact that using it in 20, 30 years when quantum computers have matured may be similar to using an encryption algorithm from the 60s or the 70s, where depending on the algorithm, today it could take you minutes or hours to crack a single encryption using that older, weaker encryption. So quantum computers are powerful, right? There's obviously a lot of cost in actually getting it into your organization. With AI, you can just throw an engineer at a computer with it. Quantum computers are a lot more expensive. It requires a lot more commitment up front. But the last thing I actually want to focus on for quantum computers is, as much as in our domain we focus on quantum computers because of the encryption, because of the danger it will pose in a few years, it's actually not the biggest use of quantum computers. The biggest use of quantum computers will likely be in finance or global manufacturing or energy or material science. These are oftentimes the biggest sponsors, the biggest funders of these programs. My apologies. So we just happen to be an affected industry because of the math that we use. But all hope is not lost. In fact, there were recently several quantum-safe algorithms selected to be the standard encryptions going forward that can defend against these. And as long as you are not bound by FIPS or some other standard or some kind of compliance, and you're able to switch to these, I urge you do. Because right now, if you're not, your enemies can read your data, and in 2 to 3 years, in 10 to 20 years, they'll be able to read it and know what you were doing, which, depending on your use case, may not be bad. Depending on your use case, that may be really bad. Now, sometimes I gotta stop myself about talking about these because I am a big nerd. If you come talk to me afterwards, I will talk your ear off. Now, Rust. I'm gonna be getting a little bit into the weeds with this one. I am a programmer. What is the hype behind Rust, right? The promise is Rust is a secure programming language that will replace C. Recently, Microsoft put out a statistic saying that 70% of its vulnerabilities were memory-based, meaning that if you use Rust, 70% of your bugs are gone, right? Secure. And on top of that, the people that use it love it, right? It makes it easier to write correct code. When it compiles, you know it's correct, unless you made a logic error or a logic bug. Now, are there nuances? Yes, absolutely. For example, is it the right case for everything? No. And why is that? Because Rust takes an extremely long time to truly master, right? If you have a Python developer, a C developer, a C++, or Java, and they're trained on that, right? You have an operational project that is providing value today, and it needs to be done tomorrow or next week, or you're on tight deadlines. Do you have the leeway to take off a week, 2 weeks, 3 months to train your engineers to write perfect Rust code, idiomatic Rust code? Maybe not. So in that case, maybe it's the right thing for the next project. Maybe not. But we as leaders need to understand that when is the right time to pivot? What is the cost of pivoting? Because in the short term, maybe it's too expensive to pivot in the short term, right? We need to get this out the door now, right? We need this project done now or next week, and we don't have this time, right? Our budget is tight. Our schedule is tight. We don't have that time. Maybe we do. Maybe we are more invested in the long term, and maybe it's a great choice, right? That's up to you as a leader to decide and you as an engineer to understand. Now, yeah, I will move on because I know I'm getting short on time. Now, drones, I'm not going to talk too much about this because it's not necessarily a new technology. However, I think a lot of people watching the war in Ukraine are looking at the drone warfare that's going on and saying, wow, that's going to revolutionize drone warfare. The ability to get a $100 drone, attach a small grenade onto it, and overwhelm your enemy. You know, if you have a budget of $1 million, you can get thousands of these drones. But recently, I actually had the benefit or the privilege of attending the Modern Day Marine Exposition in DC. And I got to see some really interesting technologies that are one response to this particular problem. Whereas a lot of people might be looking at this drone swarm and saying, well, how can you possibly protect against that, right? You can't shoot them all down. But a lot of these technologies will shoot high-intensity microwave radiation to disable them, or some other method in an area of denial attack. So it doesn't matter if they send 1,000 or 1,000,000 drones at you. If they're all coming in a general area, you can disable them. Or if you have a 360-degree perimeter, you're more or less safe. And then there's other things that they can do, right? They can cover them in maybe aluminum foil, or they can fly them high out of your range and then drop the grenades on you, right? There's a response and a counter response in this. But I think a lot of the hype and the buzzword around the drones in Ukraine and how they're being used isn't taking into consideration some of these counter responses that we are developing in response to this threat. Yeah, I'm not going to cover too much on that now because, again, I think we all understand the role of autonomous vehicles, drones, and as well as manned drones. Now, the warfighting workforce, how does it actually impact us? I'm going to cover 3 general costs: the cost of recruiting, the cost of training and retaining, and the cost of contractors. Now, the cost of recruiting, it's no secret that we have a recruiting problem. And for some numbers, about $15,000 is what we spend to get a single person to join. We have about 15,000 recruiters or so, more, that are actively recruiting people. And I want to say the military spends about $3 billion on recruiting a year. And if you're with a private company, I assume that you probably have a pretty good recruiting budget as well. Now, one study that I was reading mentioned that about a fifth of incoming service members listed job training as a motivation for joining. And I can only imagine in a technical field like this, that number would be higher. Now, imagine how less alluring it would be if instead of saying, hey, you can come do the Navy and work on nuclear reactors, you can come to the Navy and work on quantum computers, right? You can do this really cool thing. They basically be walking up to us to enlist. However, if we said, hey, you're gonna be working on World War I vehicles, they're busted, but they still go, right? But we gotta keep them around. They'd probably be a lot less willing to join. Now, obviously, we can always throw more money at the problem, right? You sign-on bonus big enough, people will join, but it definitely makes it harder, and that's not what we need right now. Now, the cost of training and retaining. If you look at a lot of the technical MOSs, ratings, or jobs in the military, the people that are going into these jobs often have prior experience, whether that's a 2 or a 4-year degree, whether that's actual job experience, or whether they've been doing it for 10 years since they were 9. They have experience going in. And we benefit from that as a military force. And I think, again, the people in this room that are with private companies also understand some of this challenge. But we cannot bring somebody in, train them for a year, and expect them to be a decent mid-level engineer, right? Even if they're a junior engineer, they often need someone to hold their hand and help them. We cannot expect to be a lethal warfighting workforce with such a large number of junior engineers. So we rely on people having this experience that makes them more able to tackle these problems on their own, right? Able to take that initiative. Now, if we don't align ourselves with the private sector and the technology that they're using, which are the hyped technologies, right? AI, quantum computers, Rust, things like this. Rust is a little less popular. It's the 13th most used language. I forgot to add this. It's the 13th most used language, but the most loved language by its developers. But if we don't align ourselves with the technology that the private sector uses, we will be in trouble because the people coming in will have 0 experience. And now suddenly our workforce lethality goes from pretty well up here down to here because now the people coming in genuinely have no experience. They're genuinely junior developers. I think we do a good job right now of actually bringing in people that know what they're doing, and we actually have some good engineers on our side. Now, retaining. Again, it's no issue, or it's no secret that we have a problem with recruiting and retaining, especially in this industry. Why would you stay in when you can go out and make 6 figures? Whereas if you stay in, you're going to make $30,000, $40,000, you're going to get yelled at, You're going to have gate on Sunday. Who wants that? Now, there is a benefit to that, especially in our industry. There are things that you can do here that you can't do anywhere else, right? Some of the operations that are conducted, you can really only do on the military side. Maybe you get really, really, really lucky and you find a really good civilian company. But for the most part, what we do in the military, that itself is a retaining bonus. That itself is a re-enlistment bonus. If you are interested in cyber and you want to do these things, you want to stay in to do these things, right? For you to get out, sure, you might be making more money, you might be more comfortable, but you're not going to be doing those things that you want. So that alone is a recruitment bonus. I think that's a pro that we have going for us. And obviously, if we have the technology that people want to work on, hey, you can work on AI. They will stay with us because if we have them working on, again, World War I vehicles, they're going to want to get out so they can actually work on the things that actually do interest them. So by having the things that interest them, it's a double-edged sword, right? We retain them, they want to stay with us, and by having operations that rely on that, they can really only get that with us. Now, lastly, the majority of people we bring in and train will leave, and a lot of them will end up as contractors. Although, not to say every contractor is prior service. Sometimes it's just out of college or the private sector. Now, in either case, they often know the technologies that the civilian sector is using. Maybe if they're prior service, they'll know your specific technology, your specific vehicle, right? A little bit of an outlier, but in general, contractors, let me restart that a little bit. In general, if we use the technology that the private sector uses, the amount of contractors we'll be able to pull out of our population will be higher. In general, I would classify this as we as a military population derive value from what our population knows if we can use it. If our population knows quantum computers really, really well, but we don't have anything for that, we're not going to get any value out of our population. Sure, our GDP might go up, right? Sure, our country may, on the civilian side, experience improvements in X, Y, Z, but on the military side, we derive no value from that. Sure, the country's getting better, but the military isn't. So if we have the technologies that the civilian sector is using, hey, you have 10 years of experience with this specific technology, great, come work for us, we use it. That means that we have more high-quality engineers that are able to come work for us. And on top of that, another downside of not aligning ourselves with the public sector is that because the pool is smaller, it's often more expensive to get developers, right? Economics. Lower supply, higher demand, and higher cost. So, identification and future emerging technologies. I don't have any frameworks for you. I don't have any real answers for you. And again, this is something that we as leaders need to be able to make on the day-to-day. This is something we as engineers need to be able to understand. So when the leaders come to us with, hey, what's the real value of this technology, we can answer that. As a leader, if you come up to me and you say, hey, should we use blockchain? I can tell you yes or no, depending upon how I feel. But I don't know, you as a leader, what is your unit trying to do? What is your long-term organizational value, right? The real question you should be asking me is, what benefits can I get from using blockchain? What are the key fundamental ideas behind it, right? Tell me about Rust. Tell me about the pros and the cons. Now, you as an engineer, I would hope you're expected to be able to provide that domain knowledge to those leaders that are making those decisions. And it is your job to be able to be well-versed in what you're talking about, right? If I love something, if I love a certain technology, I will go out of my way to say, bad of X, downside of X, X is bad, and I'll read all the blog posts, I'll read the Reddit posts, I'll read what people are saying. I'll do it so I can understand, I already understand the pros of it, I already understand why I'm using it and why I love it. I want to understand what are people saying about this, about the things that are negative, because oftentimes they're in a different use case than what I'm doing. So if you're asking me about this use case, but I've only been over here and I say yes, but someone in that use case already said no, I can give that nuance to you as an engineer if I know it. If I don't and I say yes, I can mislead the leader into making a bad decision for the organization. So that kind of ties into all 3 points. You need to be able to approach somebody that you know knows the nuances. Either they're impartial and they know the technology, or they love it or they hate it, but they know both sides of it and they're able to accurately give you that breakdown. Now, you as a leader, if you have an engineer like that, keep them, right? They are invaluable. They are awesome. And what questions do you need to ask? Again, that's going to be technology dependent, right? If it's blockchain, what's the purpose of it? What's it used for? What's it like, right? Where has it been used outside of cryptocurrency? Tell me about this or that. Those are questions that are going to be specific to that. If I'm asking about drones and autonomous vehicles, I'm going to be asking a different set of questions. And lastly, who do you need to ask? I would say, in general, leaders ask your engineers. Don't ask them the yes or no. Ask them to explain it to you. Now, with that being said, there's a caveat. I don't expect the engineer with 5 years of experience getting really into the weeds with it to be able to teach you everything in 5 minutes, but they should be able to give you the operational value. Here's what it can do. Here's what it does. Blah, blah, blah. Is that?
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so let's go ahead and give Julian